space was not silent that night. Across the dark ocean between the stars, a ripple of light passed like a heartbeat. It began as a single red flare at the far edge of the Perseus arm, a warning beacon that had not been lit in 10,000 years. And then, as if some ancient hand had pressed a switch, others followed. Hundreds. Thousands. A wave of crimson pulses radiating through the void, warning every listening outpost, every listening species, that the nightmare had returned. On the world of Thalrock Prime, a planet of black spires and endless desert plains, the alarms rang in the war citadel. High Admiral Zane stood on the balcony, her chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the three moons, her clawed hands gripping the railing. Below her, the city was chaos, thousands of troops mobilizing, hangars roaring to life as the first warships lifted into the blood-red sky. "Show me the map," she rasped, her voice carrying the command tone of someone who had led more campaigns than most species had histories. The holographic projector bloomed to life before her, displaying the galaxy as a shining spiral of stars. And there they were, the red pulses, flashing like dying heartbeats. One by one, systems along the outer rim went dark. Entire sectors were being consumed. Her mandibles clicked in agitation. She had studied the ancient records, had sworn she would never see this day. So, she whispered, "The Scourge live." The officers behind her shifted uneasily. Even speaking the name felt like summoning a ghost. The Scourge were not a species. They were not a nation. They were a coalition of war-born horrors, gene-forged abominations, and machine intellects whose only purpose was destruction. When they had come before, they had burned half the galaxy to ash before being stopped. Empires had fallen, star systems annihilated, entire species erased. And now they were back. "High Admiral," one of her aides said, bowing low, "the other empires are signaling for a joint war council." "They request your presence." "Of course they do," Zane hissed. "They are frightened. We all are." She turned back to the map and studied the encroaching wave of red. The first fleets were already fighting and losing. They had prepared for pirates, border skirmishes, rogue warlords. They had not prepared for this. "Summon every ship we can spare," she ordered. "And tell the council we will meet at once. This galaxy will not burn again." But deep in her war-hardened heart, she wondered if the words were a lie. The fleets assembled. From the great shipyards of the Qatari Dominion came leviathans of war, armored like mountains and bristling with plasma cannons. The Serpentine Valara brought their living ships, great organic vessels that pulsed with eerie bioluminescence. The Ashari, silent as always, deployed their sleek black phantoms that seemed to bend light around themselves. It was the largest armada seen in 1,000 generations, millions of warships drawn from dozens of empires, united by desperation. And still, the Scourge came. Battle after battle, the combined fleets fell back. The Scourge learned. Adapted. Every time the empires thought they had slowed them, the enemy evolved new tactics, new weapons, new monstrosities. Whole planets went dark overnight. Refugee flotillas crowded the hyperlanes, carrying billions fleeing for their lives. At the War Council, the mood was grim. "This cannot be stopped," the Qatari warlord snarled, slamming his clawed fist into the table. "We have thrown everything we have at them. Our fleets are dying. Our worlds are burning. The galaxy will fall within the year." "Perhaps," said Zane coldly, "but there is still one card left to play." The room went silent. Every delegate turned toward her, mandibles, tendrils, and eyes shifting uneasily. They all knew what she meant. "No," hissed a Valara elder, his voice like cracking glass. "Not them." "They are dangerous," another delegate said. "Unpredictable. Uncontrollable. They are the only ones who have ever defeated an existential threat without collapsing into civil war afterward," Zane said, her tone brooking no argument. "You all fear them, as well you should, but tell me this, what other choice do we have?" Silence. Finally, a single voice said what they were all thinking. "Summon the humans." On the far side of the Sol system, aboard the UNSC Resolve, Rear Admiral Jonathan Rains stood alone in the observation deck, watching Saturn's golden rings turn slowly below. He had seen war before. Too much of it. The scar along his jaw and the deep lines at the corners of his eyes spoke to years of campaigns fought across distant colonies. He had seen the worst of humanity and the best. When the message came in, he said nothing for a long moment. Just stood there, reading the translated plea from the Galactic Council. "They're actually asking," Captain Elena Park said quietly, stepping beside him. Her uniform was crisp, her black hair pulled into a regulation bun, but her eyes betrayed unease. "They're desperate," Rains replied at last. His voice was low, gravelly, carrying the weight of someone who had made too many impossible choices. "They swore they'd never call on us again. Not after what happened at the Treaty of Lysara. And yet, here we are." Rains turned to face her. "What do you think, Captain? Do we answer?" Park hesitated. "If what they're saying is true, if the Scourge really are back, then we don't have a choice." For a moment, Rains said nothing. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You're right. Signal High Command. Mobilization Protocol." Park blinked. "Full mobilization?" A thin, grim smile crossed Rains's face. "They're expecting our fleet. Let's give them something better." The order spread like wildfire. From Earth to Mars, from Titan to Europa, from the Belt colonies to the Ord habitats, the call went out: humanity was going to war. Recruitment centers overflowed. Factories switched to wartime production overnight. Old carriers, mothballed since the last war, were hauled out of storage and refitted with the latest tech. But it wasn't just soldiers and ships. Civilians volunteered to crew supply lines, to build munitions, to feed the war machine. For the first time in centuries, humanity stood united, not as separate nations, but as one people, facing extinction together. And across the galaxy, the other empires watched in awe. The humans were not simply assembling a fleet. They were unleashing humanity. The Galactic War Council was in chaos. The chamber was a cathedral of light and shadow, its dome glittering with holographic stars, each one representing a living system, or at least, one that had been living yesterday. Now, many were dark, extinguished like candles in a storm. The representatives of more than 50 species crowded the tiers, their voices rising in a cacophony of clicks, growls, hisses, and harsh metallic tones. Even the telepathic delegates radiated waves of raw panic into the air. At the center of the chamber, the great star map pulsed red, its spiraling arms slowly being devoured by a spreading wave of crimson. "We are finished," barked the Qatari warlord, his scaled fist striking the table hard enough to leave a dent. "Carno's reach is lost. The Ishari fleets are gone. We are weeks from total collapse." "They are already at our core worlds," cried a Valara elder, his long, bioluminescent tendrils quivering. "We must sue for peace, offer them our outer colonies if we must." "There is no peace with the Scourge," High Admiral Zane snarled, her mandibles snapping together sharply. "We tried that 10,000 years ago. Do you not remember the price?" The chamber fell into tense silence. And then, as if answering a question no one wanted to speak aloud, the great doors opened with a hiss. The sound of boots echoed across the chamber. They were not the measured, clicking footfalls of Thalrock soldiers or the soft pads of Qatari claws. They were heavy, deliberate, and unmistakably human. Every eye turned as the newcomers entered, a dozen figures in dark navy uniforms, carrying themselves with the grim precision of professional soldiers. At their head walked Rear Admiral Jonathan Rains, flanked by Captain Elena Park and a handful of human officers. They were unarmed, but no one in the chamber doubted for a second that every one of them was dangerous. Rains stopped in the exact center of the chamber, looking up at the sea of alien faces staring down at him. His weathered features were calm, his hands clasped behind his back. When he spoke, his voice carried, steady as stone. "You called for us," he said. "So here we are." A low murmur rippled through the chamber. Some of the delegates looked relieved. Others looked terrified. "You brought your fleets," demanded the Qatari warlord, his tone sharp, almost accusatory. Rains's lips twitched into something that was not quite a smile. "No," he said. "We didn't bring fleets." Confusion rippled through the council. Zane narrowed her multifaceted eyes. Then what did you bring, human? Rains's voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. We brought people. He gestured toward the hovering holo display. It flickered, shifted, and then the chamber was filled with new images. Earth's mobilization was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Billions of men and women lined up at recruitment centers, their faces grim but determined. Assembly lines thundered, producing tanks, dropships, and exosuits at a pace no alien species could match. Shipyards glowed like forges, hammering out new carriers, dreadnoughts, and troop transports. On Mars, orbital elevators moved night and day, sending troops and munitions into orbit without pause. Titan's refineries poured liquid methane into titanic fuel depots for the warships. Out past Neptune, even the Belt colonies, notorious for their independence, were pledging men and material. Humanity was not sending a token fleet. Humanity was going to war. The chamber was silent, save for the quiet hum of the holoprojectors. "This is madness," said the Valara elder at last, his tendrils coiling in distress. "You will burn yourselves out in a generation." "Maybe," Rain said. "But we know something you've all forgotten." He looked around the room, meeting alien gazes one by one. "You fight wars with fleets. We fight wars with everything we have. When humanity goes to war, it isn't just soldiers and ships. It's the engineers who build them, the farmers who feed them, the children who grow up knowing their parents may not come home. It's entire civilizations turning into war machines. That's what we brought." He stepped closer to the holo, and the red wave of scourge expansion filled the chamber. "We're not here to hold the line. We're here to break them." When the human fleet arrived at Carnot's Reach, the galaxy watched. The other empires had been fighting a bitter, desperate retreat there for weeks. The scourge had overrun the orbital defenses, seized control of 3 of the system's 4 habitable worlds, and were days away from capturing the 4th. The combined galactic fleets had been reduced to a handful of battered ships, holding the line by sheer stubbornness. Then the humans came. The Resolve jumped in first, flanked by a wall of carriers, gunships, and dreadnoughts. But they did not form a defensive screen. They did not wait for the enemy to come to them. They charged. Human dropships poured toward the surface of Carnot's 4 like a storm of meteors, streaking through the upper atmosphere in controlled fireballs. The galactic commanders expected orbital bombardments. They expected distant, cautious artillery. What they got instead were boots on the ground. Rains himself stood on the command deck, watching the battle unfold. "Report," he barked. "First wave has landed," Park said, her voice clipped. "Resistance is heavy, but they're holding." On the holo, the icons representing human infantry spread across the surface of Carnot's 4 like wildfire. They advanced through shattered cities, close-quarters combat against scourge monstrosities that towered twice their height. And somehow, impossibly, they were winning. Down on the surface, the air was a choking haze of smoke and plasma fire. Sergeant Kyle Mercer slammed his exosuit's armored boot into the chest of a charging scourge warbeast, sending it crashing into a wall. His visor was cracked, his armor scorched, but he didn't slow down. "All squads, push forward," he roared over comms. "Clear them out of the refinery sector." Gunfire lit the streets. The scourge screamed as they fell under disciplined human fire. Grenades boomed, collapsing entire nests. By the end of the 3rd day, Carnot's 4 was no longer a retreating front. It was a human stronghold. When the battle was finally over, the galaxy was stunned. No one had expected a victory. No one had expected a counterattack that brutal, that decisive. The scourge had not been stopped, but for the first time since their return, they had been pushed back. And every empire in the galaxy now knew humanity was not just another fleet. Humanity was a weapon. War changed after Carnot's. For the first time since the scourge's return, the galaxy stopped losing ground. The Great Retreat slowed, then halted, and finally reversed. Battle by battle, system by system, humanity drove the scourge back, not cautiously, not with incremental victories, but with relentless, overwhelming force. The other empires followed in humanity's wake, emboldened by the unthinkable. The scourge could bleed. But it was not without cost. The casualty lists grew with every victory. Whole divisions were wiped out. Families on Earth and Mars received death notifications by the millions. Out in the belt, volunteers lined up in droves knowing they would not come home. Humanity was burning itself white-hot, and there was no going back. On board the UNSC Resolve, Rear Admiral Jonathan Rains stood alone in the observation deck, staring at the pale blue glow of a distant nebula. His reflection in the viewport looked older than he remembered. His jaw was set, his eyes hollow. "How many more?" he asked quietly. Captain Elena Park stood at his shoulder, a tablet in her hands. She hesitated before answering. 42% losses across the expeditionary forces, she said. Some divisions, they barely exist on paper anymore. Rains didn't flinch. And the enemy? Also bleeding, she said. Harder than we expected. They've pulled back to the Zeros cluster. We think they're consolidating for a final stand. Then we finish this, Rains said, turning from the window. No more retreat. No more half measures. We end them here. Park's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Then I'll tell the fleet to prepare for the march. The last campaign began under a sky of shattered stars. The Zeros cluster was a graveyard of burned worlds and derelict stations, a place the galaxy had abandoned centuries ago. It was the perfect lair for the Scourge, dark, isolated, and far from any major trade lane. The combined galactic fleet gathered there, the largest armada in recorded history. But at its head flew the Resolve and the human battle groups. When the order came to advance, the humans did not hesitate. Dropships screamed into the upper atmospheres of dead worlds. Tanks rolled through the irradiated ruins of fallen cities. Infantry waded through waist-deep ash, fighting block by block, hive by hive. And still the Scourge resisted. They had been pushed back across half the galaxy, but here, at their last redoubt, they fought with desperate ferocity. They unleashed weapons the galaxy had never seen before, self-replicating war drones, psionic shockwaves, entire bioforges that spawned new monsters by the thousands. But humanity did not break. They adapted. Learned. Countered every new horror with fire and fury. On the ground, Sergeant Kyle Mercer fought like a man possessed. His exosuit was scarred, its left arm half destroyed, but he refused to stop. Plasma fire lit the ruins around him as he led his squad through a breach in the enemy's final perimeter. We're close, he shouted over comms. Push forward. His team surged with him, cutting down Scourge warriors at point-blank range. The air stank of burned flesh and ozone. Somewhere overhead, human bombers screamed past, dropping bunker-buster munitions that shook the ground like an earthquake. Mercer didn't look up. He just kept moving. In orbit, Rains stood on the bridge of the Resolve, watching the holofeed as the battle raged across dozens of fronts. The galaxy's armada was burning through the last of its reserves. Entire fleets were gone, reduced to clouds of wreckage. Sir, Park said, stepping up beside him. We've identified the primary hive structure. Deep underground, beneath the equatorial mountains. It's massive. Rains nodded grimly. Then that's where we end it. He keyed the fleet-wide channel. This is Rear Admiral Rains, he said, his voice cold and steady. You've fought your way across half the galaxy to get here. You've buried friends, brothers, sisters. You've paid the price in blood, and you've never stopped. But this is it. This is where we finish the war. No more running. No more dying on our knees. Today, we take the fight to their heart. There was no cheer over the comms. No celebration. Just silence, grim, hard silence, and the kind of resolve that only comes when there is nothing left but the will to finish. The final assault lasted 6 days. Humans and their allies fought street by street through the mountain tunnels, breaching deeper into the hive with each passing hour. Entire caverns became killing fields, filled with the corpses of Scourge monsters and human soldiers alike. And then, at last, they reached the heart. The command node was a nightmare, a pulsating, living cathedral of bone and steel, filled with the humming of alien minds linked together in perfect unison. Rains himself was there when the charges were set. His boots crunched over black ichor as he stood in the center of the chamber, staring at the grotesque architecture. "How long?" he asked. "5 minutes," Park replied, her rifle slung over her shoulder, her face streaked with grime and blood. Rains nodded. "Then let's give the galaxy its sunrise." They pulled back through the tunnels, fighting a running battle all the way to the extraction point. At T-30 seconds, the last dropship lifted off. And then the world went white. The detonation ripped through the planet's core, shattering the hive, collapsing entire mountain ranges. From orbit, it was like watching a star being born, a blinding flash that turned night into day across half the cluster. When the light faded, there was nothing left of the scourge. Weeks later, the Galactic Council met again. This time, there was no shouting. No panic. Only silence as the delegates looked at the humans standing before them. High Admiral Zane rose first. Her mandibles clicked as she bowed her head, a gesture no Thalrock had ever offered to an outsider. "You saved us," she said. "You saved the galaxy." Rains shook his head. "No," he said softly. "We reminded the galaxy how to save itself." He looked around the chamber, meeting the gaze of every species present. "You all expected a fleet," he said. "But what you got was humanity, our will, our unity, our refusal to die quietly. That's what won this war. Not our ships. Not our weapons. Us." He turned to leave, but stopped at the threshold. "Remember that," he said. "Because if this galaxy ever faces extinction again, it won't need Earth's fleets. It'll need Earth's people." For a long moment, the council remained silent. And then, one by one, they rose, not in fear, not in politics, but in respect. For the first time in recorded history, every empire in the galaxy stood as one. Humanity had not just ended the war. They had changed the galaxy forever.